I have I guess, zooming out a second, because there's two questions, I guess two directions that I'm being pulled towards, but I think go to the broader question, which is I'm totally on board for suffering as one of the core metrics that we make ethical decisions by, but it also seems insufficient, which is to say, if the question arises of, can I kill someone in the night in a way that makes them not suffer if they have no family and their family wouldn't suffer? And I haven't been able to really codify and put into language what it is that makes life, or at least let's just keep it to human life and other sorts of species of animals that we deem important, unable to be killed even in a way that is painless to them, that doesn't cause suffering. What gets added into that?
Can I give a concrete example?
Sure.
So let's say there's, I don't know how big a pack of deer is, but let's say there's 6 deer that's their family, right? So if you kill one, the other 5 will be sad. But what Charlie's saying is he thinks it's unethical to sneak up in the middle of the night with 6 humans and in a coordinated throat slit, you get all 6. There's no suffering, right? Still seems like you wouldn't do it to dogs, so you might not want to do it to deer, but it extends beyond suffering. So it becomes more than just that metric.
You'd be surprised what people are willing to do to dogs. You know, I made a video recently about why I eat dogs and dog meat, and it was essentially a parody of kind of meat eating arguments. And I got a lot of hate mail from people who genuinely thought that I was someone who ate dogs. And it's quite funny to see these preachy, annoying, how do you know if someone doesn't eat dogs? Don't worry, they'll tell you. It was very entertaining. To answer your question, the point that I like to stress is that I don't try to make an argument for veganism that's based upon kind of base ethical principles, and we can talk about them if we like. But my usual approach is to make an argument from consistency, which is just to say, I want to show that what you already believe is probably consistent with the ethical vegan worldview. So if you're somebody who thinks, I mean, I suppose the correct answer to the question of whether or not it's okay is that it's as okay as it would be, for instance, to do it to dogs, or, potentially to do it to humans, right? If you had genuinely isolated humans, you're welcome to say that suffering is a necessary but not sufficient condition of moral worth, right? Because if I killed a bunch of humans, even if they didn't feel any pain, there'd be something wrong with that. I think that would equally commit you to the view that it would be wrong to do it to a deer. However, if you think that it's actually okay to kill a deer painlessly, then you might be committed to the view that it's actually okay to kill a human being painlessly, or at the very least that it's not bad for the human. And that's something I would assert. I would assert that as far as concerns the actual person being killed, if someone's killed painlessly and immediately die, it can't be bad for them to be dead, right? It can't be bad for you to be dead. That doesn't make any sense. We can only talk in terms of it being bad for other people, for society or something like that. And we can talk about it being bad in terms of the character of the person who does it. So you could say it makes you a bad person if you're the kind of person who would do that. That would be like a virtue ethics perspective. Ethics is based in the virtues that a person holds and how they act towards others and things like this. But I think that if you are someone who thinks that the only thing that matters is suffering, then you can invent these kind of convoluted thought experiments in which you can kind of do something that seems immoral, but in fact would be ethically permissible. But they're so kind of ethically far-fetched that biting that bullet and accepting that as just a kind of unhappy consequence of your view is easier than accepting the kind of unhappy consequences of competing ethical theories, if that makes sense.
Sure. Well, actually, the direction that I go with it is not necessarily to justify any sort of meat eating. It's to question beyond suffering, because as I investigate what I see as suffering, does this thing move and make sounds similar to me, right? So if you yelp, I will assume that you're suffering. And I think I notice even with lobsters, when I was a young boy, somebody boiled a lobster and it was the sound of the air leaving, and I thought it was screaming, and that affected me much more than if I understood, oh no, it wasn't screaming. So I recognize that even my perspective on suffering is so limited and so narrow to what matching my own experience of suffering. The reason that I asked that particular question is because I'm not an antinatalist or anything, but then I then wonder if there is something precious about life uninterrupted, right? Such that I couldn't kill a human being in its sleep painlessly. What ethical considerations do I need to give to plants or grass? And I know it can go crazy as we go down that route. And then how does one interact in a world that requires me seemingly to kill in order to continue?
Yeah, I was going to ask this. What happens when we figure out that plants have consciousness and they experience pain? My sense is that consciousness, my personal sense is that consciousness exists on a spectrum. And, at some point I draw an arbitrary line. I'm curious what you think about this.
I mean, this one's actually incredibly easy. The question of kind of plant sentience, which most people kind of bring up in a frivolous manner, but I can, it can also be brought up very seriously. What do we do if we find out that, plants are capable of suffering? Plants have consciousness. The answer is still to eat the plants. I'll tell you why. It takes more plants to feed livestock than it takes to feed human beings, right? We're already growing enough crops to feed the world population 3 times over, but we're sending those crops to feed livestock. The majority of the crops that we grow, the plants that we grow, are being fed to livestock. So no vegan should be under the illusion that they are not responsible for any animal suffering. Of course we are. Everybody is. You step on insects when you exit your house. To grow crops and plants, you need to destroy habitats and kind of flatten ground and stuff like this. So you're going to be responsible for animal suffering. It's about minimizing that suffering. So if plants can feel pain, then we've got 2 options. We either grow those plants and eat those plants, causing some plant suffering, or we grow even more plants to then cause those plants suffering, so we can feed those plants to livestock, so we can then cause the livestock to suffer and kill the livestock to then eat the meat, right? Like we would still actually minimize the amount of suffering we're responsible for by eating the plants directly. Now, I agree with you. This would be a really, really difficult ethical problem if it were more like we had to choose between killing animals and killing plants if plants could feel pain. I still think we'd err on the side of killing the plants because I think we'd agree that they at least have less sentience. But even if they had, even if we discovered that plants were more capable of suffering than any other animal that we have. Like plants are actually the most sensitive things that exist. The way to minimize the suffering we'd be responsible for would be to eat them directly still, rather than grow more, feed them to animals, kill the animals, and eat the plants by proxy.
Hope that you guys enjoyed that clip. If you want to see more like this and have us do more podcasts, we are 100% funded by our generous patrons. And if you'd like to contribute, there's a link in the description, and we'll have one pop up on the screen right here so that we can do more podcasts where we have fun conversations and hopefully some deep ones like this. Either way, hope that you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one.